agencies, ministries, and agencies, our colleagues from abroad, and other attendees of our event today, all those of you who care about the topic of this discussion, the human trafficking and the existing threats and challenges associated with that, as well as the decisions that we are to make. Just recently, the world celebrated the Day of Anti-Trafficking, and from our own history as a nation, Ukrainians know very well what it means when the entire nation is being exterminated, starting from the days of Zaporizhia siege, the cancellation of Ukrainian culture, Stalin's repressions, destruction of the church, and up to the annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass. This year, a new wave of genocide came to Ukraine starting in February 24, when millions of Ukrainians were forced to flee their homes. Over 9 million of our compatriots fled abroad, and only some of them returned. The same number of Ukrainians became IDPs, displaced within their own country. Millions of Ukrainian children were deported forcibly to the Russian Federation and the Republic of Belarus. So the threat of being victimized by human trafficking as a result of this war is high as never before. We have our armed forces withstanding this threat, countering the threat through military actions. We, on the other hand, need to work out at tactics for the refugees and IDPs management. We need to make sure that we are aware of the existing and potential threats associated with human trafficking. We need to work out specific steps to address this challenge and this problem when it occurs. We need to collect and generalize the ideas that could help us um, effectively counter human trafficking and the genocide of Ukrainians. The Ministry of Internal Affairs initiated this meeting. But why? Why do we need it? Why do we need together, um, together as colleagues, and talk about it? We need to know what threats exist, and we need to know what we as a ministry can do to address it. And at this, I would like to pass the floor to Katerina Polichenko, the Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine. Yes, hello everyone. Olha, you have given us so much insight in your opening words regarding this event today. I could just add, I guess, that with the war happening, this topic has become relevant as never before, and we're here today to discuss potential solutions, potential ways to address these challenges that are associated with human trafficking. And I firmly believe that this conversation today will help us identify those next steps that we should jointly take. And I would like to thank everyone for making the time and join us here today in this discussion, because our goal was to bring together the professionals who work in this field and who could contribute effectively, who could work together to identify potential solutions to this critical issue today. The Ministry of Internal Affairs is open and willing to cooperate with all the stakeholders, the National Police of Ukraine, with whom we are working on identifying a concept to prevent human trafficking that would consist of specific steps for us to take together to identify and prosecute those engaged in human trafficking in Ukraine and abroad and protect those victimized by it. We need to work together towards raising the awareness through the awareness campaign for our public, for the IDPs, for our refugees returning from abroad who could fall victim to this crime. We are working together with the Interpol, Europol, and I am confident that this joint effort would help us work out more mechanisms to effectively address this issue. So thank you so much for giving me the floor, and I'm truly looking forward to this discussion, hoping that it would be its results would be duly reflected in our work. Thank you so much, Katerina. You are absolutely right. There are those who need our protection and our support, who are in a situation of helplessness, and it is truly a noble um, deed, and it's this effort is noble, and we really need to strive to become a society with a clearly identified social mission, working together towards common goals, protecting its vulnerable members. But can Ukraine truly become a strong and just social state? And how can our international partners help us address our social needs in the times of this war? And is that effort enough? So I'm hoping that we will hear more about this and we will get some answers from Irina Tushnitska in her opening remarks. Good morning, everyone attending this crucial conversation through the social media platforms and other channels. I am Irina Tushnitska, Deputy Director of the project that you all know as Surge. I would just like to say a few words about our project and what we do. So our Surge project that is supporting governance essentially is operating with the help of the Canadian government and the Ukrainian government. It is a successor of another project, again aimed to support governance, that you uh, might have known as EDGE. So we work to support the government of Ukraine with the essential reforms by recruiting the local experts who have both the national and international experience in the respective fields. We've been working closely with our authorities. We have overall 8 operating priorities. And so, as I already pointed out, we are working exclusively with the local experts. Today, it's about 70 of them, I believe. And so, together with the national police back in the Edge project, we did work together. And I'm looking forward to other projects, including to prevent human trafficking. So today, one of the most disgraceful phenomena that exist in our society is human trafficking, because it is an attack on human dignity. Millions of people looking for a better future end up in um, of slavery. Basically, every year the turnover from that crime is about 30 billion a year. So from the beginning of the full-scale war waged by Russia on sovereign Ukraine, millions of Ukrainians had to flee, which means changing their place of residence, and oftentimes they would flee to EU. Almost 100% of those fleeing were women and children. And from day one, we realized and we knew that we need to help our government counter human trafficking. When the war began, the EU recognized human trafficking for sexual exploitation and other purposes remains one of the greatest threats for the women and children fleeing Ukraine, because in those conditions, a person is just easier to manipulate and uh, becoming a victim of different crimes. They become victims of different crimes. And this is what criminals know, and they are using it. And I'm afraid that the situation that we have today is unfortunately favorable in this respect. A specific group that is facing this threat is, of course, unaccompanied children who are traveling alone. So just to say a few words about what has been done so far to this end, from the very first day of the full-scale war waged by Russia against sovereign Ukraine, was this initiative that we started aiming to raise awareness. It was a powerful campaign covering over 7 million of Ukrainians, engaging the First Lady, for example, of Ukraine, and we distributed leaflets. We built a website, safewoman.ua, that it was actually built very quickly, and it contains essential information such as the contact details of the organizations who work in the field and who could help the victims of human trafficking. We put up our posters at railway stations, at social services, and at other venues and public spaces. So this initiative covers the period of up to 2025. It also includes the national plan and the respective steps to fulfill Resolution 1325, again through 2025. We have also designed what we call an algorithm, which is a set of steps how to help connect with your family when you are abroad and need help. But none of this would be possible without the contribution of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Ministry of Social Policy, the National Police of Ukraine, our emergency service, and our other executive agencies.
Професійні відносини і конструктивні діалоги, завдяки чому ми і далі
Professional relationships and constructive dialogue have always been our priorities, including when it comes to our anti-trafficking initiatives, keeping in mind that we need to help the vulnerable groups of Ukrainians. These actions would include changes to the legislation to simplify the procedure of accessing help by those who need it and to prevent human trafficking. And of course, we are open to new partnerships. Please feel free to reach out to distribute any of the ideas that I just presented further if you feel that could be useful. So our next plans include helping Ukrainian citizens currently located in the EU countries. We are also designing the respective trainings and other initiatives. This list is not exhaustive, of course. And like I said, we are open to new partnerships to protect Ukrainians better. Thank you. Thank you, Irina. Serge is actually the co-organizer and co-host of this meeting today. And at this, I would like to pass the floor to Dmytro Lubinets, the Verkhovna Rada Commissioner for Human Rights, because we know that legislation is key here when we're talking about preventing all forms of discrimination against Ukrainians, both in Ukraine and abroad. So how do we exercise parliamentary oversight? Dmytro?
Доброго дня, шановні колеги.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for giving me the floor. And I would like to thank the organizers for raising this important question. So I'll try to be brief so as not to take up too much of your time. I'll just say that we are at war and we had Ukrainians forcibly deported to the Russian Federation in an attempt to get access to, say, free human resources. And I'm afraid that Ukrainians fall victim to the crime of human trafficking. They are at a great risk. And so we are currently in negotiation with the Embassy of Sweden to see if we can provide consular service to our citizens, to maybe other kinds of protection, because the first thing that the criminals do is take away the ID of the woman. And so I'm also in contact with the courts, the judges. For example, to handle the paperwork. For example, through volunteers, we were able to pass the IDs to those who needed the documents to those who needed, so that they could leave the Russian Federation and go to Europe. So this is what we've been doing. We've been helping our citizens, and if there's a need, we are willing to help, to provide help to those who need it.
We are not only working with the Russian Federation, but also with the European Union. Millions of our citizens left. These are mostly women and people with disability, which makes them vulnerable categories. and very set to human trafficking. I have good feelings about that, though, because we have a lot of international organizations that work at the territory of the European Union. They assess the risks related to the war in Ukraine and humanitarian crisis. These recommendations are very good, in my opinion, and I do advise you to use them and to spread that information to make sure that our citizens have access to this information. I also wanted to talk about legislation. We do find that there is a certain threat this year. I can see that the total number of status and the number of people who were labeled as victims according to Article 149, which is human trafficking, went down, meaning that we have more risks and at the same time less fixation, less criminal proceedings, less people get the status of protection, which I believe is kind of an inconsistency, because if we get more risks, we should get more criminal proceedings. At least this is how I think. For citizens of Ukraine, who are all civilians, were used in this armed conflict, and then they received the status of people who suffered from human trafficking. Identifying, though, most of such people and assigning them such official status is very problematic now. To counter human trafficking in 2022-2023, we presented a plan in Washington in July, and this is what we highlighted there as well. A national coordinator in countering human trafficking will need to work more and communicate more in this sphere to provide comprehensive assistance. Dear colleagues, I would like to address you here. We need to work with the Ukrainian parliament. I mean, we had 2 drafts that would increase criminal responsibility for human trafficking. I don't want to give you a lot of details about that, but they were registered in 2021. But the relative committee sent both of these drafts of laws to further consideration. We have Katrina here. I will also draw your attention to that fact. I was present at that sitting as the head of the Committee on Human Rights. We had 2 representatives of the EU. One of them supported these draft laws, and another one from the MIF said that we have enough mechanisms just already. So I believe that we need to work with the deputies, with the MPs, and I believe that the responsibility has to be higher if we talk about human trafficking, especially to those who organize these schemes that unfortunately we do find at the territory of Ukraine. According to our data, no real organizers were in jail. Some people were detained, then they were able to be moved to staying at home detention, and then using some mechanisms they were even able to leave the territory of Ukraine, including the territories temporarily occupied, and they are unreachable for us. We can't really see them. As we know, we have certain groups active, but since we cannot punish the organizers, it leads to a larger number of such crimes. Once again, I would like to thank you for raising this topic today, which is very important. And I hope that this event will end up in certain recommendations of what will be done, what kind of changes we need to see in our legislation or secondary legislation to make sure that we do all we can to fight human trafficking. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dmitro. I am prompted that we have the first question. It is addressed to Katerina Pavlichenko. Do we have any resources where we can find materials, where we can send requests through, where we can learn about the acting legislation? Thank you. Being a co-organizer, I also want to provide some comments to what we have already heard about. I'm very grateful to Serge for supporting these initiatives. Dmitro, I would like to respond to what you said. The draft laws that were prepared together with you are very important for us today. I do hope that we can continue working to improve national legislation in countering human trafficking and increasing responsibility. This is a very relevant issue for us. Speaking of statistics, we receive statistics later, in my opinion, because right now we understand that we can't register all of the crimes timely. Some of our citizens who are moved abroad, they are not covered by the statistics from the national police. And possible human trafficking that can happen in other countries will be included into the statistics of those countries. And those respective countries will also start criminal proceedings. Again, a large part of our territory is occupied, and we have no idea about any kind of statistics there. So this is something that we need to keep in mind when talking about statistics. The question: today, all of the materials that we have with the Ministry of the Interior, together with our partners, together with international projects, can be found at official websites of the Ministry of the Interior, National Police. If you can join in promoting these materials, we can help you with that too and share. Thank you. One more comment to what you just said. It is probably reasonable to have a centralized platform, like a single window for addresses. Maybe that could be a good idea too. We are continuing. I'm turning to the audience who is with us today. You have a chance to ask your questions on YouTube. And I will remind you that our event is broadcast in 2 languages, Ukrainian and English. So please select the language that you need. We need to talk about internally displaced people and risks associated with them concerning human trafficking, and also for external migration and what risks people face abroad. So the first platform will concern people who are internally displaced. Of course, social policy of any country includes many things, and countering human trafficking is important for all of them. The situation is becoming worse, though. We don't yet understand fully whether we are facing some new factors that can help the criminals get more profit from that. Or maybe our citizens are very open and believe that the world will be only kind to them. It's hard to say. But we will talk about the protection that our internally displaced people need, and we will invite our first speaker, Uliana Tokareva, to talk about that. Good morning. First of all, I would like to say thank you for raising this topic. It is very important. Many people do face the risks of human trafficking, especially now when so many people go abroad. They come to places they have never been to in Ukraine too. They are very vulnerable. So I'm grateful to all of you who are joining in the discussion of the topic and in promoting this topic, and to the people who do their everyday activities, who update legislation, who issue warnings, who create resources to make sure that people who face the risk of human trafficking have help. I have a very short presentation. It will help us look at some of the most important issues in social protection as it is concerned human trafficking. Today, Dmitro already mentioned that coordinator in this sphere needs to work more. Time's complicated now, it's the war, and the Ministry of Social Policy is the national coordinator countering human trafficking. And we will not be able to do a lot without the stakeholders who are engaged in the process. We already said that the topic is very relevant. About 9 million Ukrainian citizens move abroad. A large number of them are children, and this is a very vulnerable category. About 6 million citizens moved from locations that are not safe to safer places. And they also become more vulnerable because they might be facing a situation when they are in danger. We had some numbers from January to May. 21 people were identified as victims of human trafficking. But we perfectly understand that this data is incomplete. There are many more people who need support. However, what is very important is what we are doing. We promote information to make sure that people get it. We had the question as to where we can find the information, what kind of algorithm exists, what kind of supports exist. We are creating such services, and we will have a separate discussion on that, because it is very important to make sure that people who come to places that are new, when they face the situation when they are vulnerable and potentially can be in zone of risks, they need to know how they can safely find a place to live or who can help them. Two things can be done here, inside Ukraine and outside Ukraine. Inside Ukraine, it's important that we share information. Irina said that a lot was done with search. It's messages that people get when they leave abroad. It's the Safe Woman website that has all of the rules on safety, what kind of signals can mark threats, where you can turn to if you get into the situation of human trafficking. And here we only talk about women and girls and children, adults and children, because labor exploitation is an important threat. We coordinate activity of international government, civil society organizations to promote this information, but there is more to be done. If people still have questions where they can go to or where can get information from, it means that we are not doing enough. The important point here, physical points, are border crossing points, railway stations, or any other kinds of transport that people are using. So it's important that we place information there. And this is what we are doing. Shelters where people stay when they come from the communities that are now in the zone of fighting. Also publish such information, but it is not yet enough. The website of the Ministry of Social Policy has the information as well on what can be done to counter human trafficking. So it's another place where you can turn to. This is the information campaign that we are actively engaged in. We hope that people will be able to see that information when they need it as they move along Ukrainian territories, or when they live abroad, or when they turn to some helping organizations, be they government or volunteer organizations. I'm also very grateful to all of the civil society that is doing so much to help, because without their support, without their daily activities, without the information that they provide, a lot of people would have found themselves in difficult situations. Children is a separate group, and we need to make sure that children at war are protected too and are not subject to human trafficking. We have a coordination headquarters for protection of children. Many organizations are present there. This is local authorities, state organizations, non-government organizations, and many others. We have recommendations developed for different organizations, those who evacuate children. And we explain what needs to be done to protect children, including children who are temporarily abroad, or children who are moved without being accompanied by adults or relatives. They need to be protected. One more thing that we do is we work outside Ukraine. We answer to the challenges that we see there. We turned to 23 countries where our citizens are now staying, and we have a proposal to sign a memorandum on the protection of rights of displaced people, including vulnerable groups. We're doing a lot to provide protection to children. First of all, this is consulate registration, because this is the guarantee that children can go back home after the martial law is lifted in the country. We're talking about adoption of Ukrainian citizens, and this is also a very vulnerable topic of discussion within the countries that our citizens go to. We already talked about legislation today. I mean, what is done to help in terms of law, how we could fix responsibility there. Until February, we were actively developing a state program that would be active until 2025. We had to stop this work. This document was never adopted because of the war. But on June 24th, we had a session on that document.
So we updated it to reflect the challenges and our response, which was all associated with a full-scale invasion by the Russian Federation. So this document was already passed on for approval. So it's pending approval, basically. And we have the resolution that was passed in February already in force. again, it aims to assist those victimized by human trafficking, including a simplified procedure for establishing their status and such, as well as concerning those who returned from imprisonment or captivity, rather, to make sure that the procedures are as friendly as possible. Also, we opened 20 centers to help the victims of human trafficking. You can find the details on our website, so feel free to reach out. Also, despite the war, we continue the disbursements of the payments to those victimized by human trafficking. You can see the numbers of the screen on the screen. Currently, we have about 20 recipients of this aid that again aims to support them through this difficult situation. Plus, we have the 1547 hotline that gives consultations on human trafficking for those victimized by it, or for those who are looking for the information on this topic. And I myself actually called this hotline and I spoke with the operators just to make sure that it's all up and running and effective. And of course, we all are perfectly aware that such a complicated issue as human trafficking and assisting the victims is an extremely difficult challenge, and actually it leads to greater challenges even in the future. So we need to work on strengthening our cooperation outside of Ukraine with the embassies, with other stakeholders, to make sure that the children are better protected, that more support is available to those who need it, including through the NGOs and governmental agencies. And once again, let me just express sincere gratitude to all of you engaged in this important effort, working out the documents and forging this collaboration that is absolutely essential. Thank you. Thank you so much, Uliana, for your insightful presentation. Just to continue on the topic, let me remind you that we passed the anti-trafficking legislation 11 years ago, and it's been amended 6 times since then. But of course, given our reality, this might not be enough. And there are important resolutions passed by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And continuing with this conversation, I would like to pass the floor to one of our MPs, Marina Bardina. Marina, as the deputy head for the Verkhovna Rada Committee on Parliamentary Cooperation, as a member of the standing delegation at the Council of Europe, could you please tell us more about the threats that we are currently facing and the legislation that could help us protect our citizens from this problem? Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for having me. And it is true that the Ministry of Internal Affairs has anti-human trafficking policies as one of its priorities. Just the other day, myself and Irina Vereshchuk met in Poltava with our IDPs, and I'm afraid that people are lacking awareness in terms of their rights. And of course, this is not something that we can address overnight. I can see that this is a long-term process the basic rights, such as the employment rights, is something that needs to be explained to us, um, starting from college. And given the situation with the employment of our IDPs, it only underscores the importance of this kind of knowledge to prevent our citizens from any kind of exploitation, including through employment. And we can secure this by making sure that everyone knows their rights. And of course, we need to make sure that our law enforcement works effectively to prevent this kind of situations, such as associated with human trafficking. And it is true, the resolution that you mentioned earlier was passed by the Council of Europe. And in a way, Ukraine was the catalyst for it to happen. So it serves to protect the girls and women as labor migrants and those seeking refuge from human trafficking. And of course, it has this gender component, as we can see, because it addresses mainly women and girls as the most vulnerable groups. Although, if, for example, we look at the research available to date, such as the one conducted by IOM, we can see that men are victimized by, say, labor exploitation or employment exploitation, and more often, and women fall victim to sexual exploitation. So it all depends on the field, basically, that we analyze. Regarding what we do in the parliament, one of my colleagues, former colleagues, and now Dmitro Lubinets, our Commissioner for Human Rights, as Dmitro mentioned earlier, we did have this basic legislation adopted, serving as the foundation for the development of this sophisticated and extensive legal practice. And we, of course, need to work to improve it further, such as this initiative to set up the competent committee to strengthen our effort in terms of the prosecution and imprisonment for the crimes associated with human trafficking. And of course, strengthening our procedures regarding the identification of this kind of crime, because it is not always that someone victimized by this kind of crime can actually identify it. And it's not always that they go to the police to report it. So we need to work on that as well, including in terms of how the police handle this kind of crimes. Regarding sexual exploitation, and by the way, I have been dealing with gender equality and the gender rights from the very beginning of my work at the parliament. So given this armed conflict, all of us are now witnessing the cases of forced prostitution and sexual exploitation. I mean, we've heard about it a lot, about how the Russian soldiers are committing this kind of crimes, crime against our people. So taking into account the best UN practices, we are now working to design and develop basically the legislation that could help us address this effectively to protect our people. And I'm hoping that our parliament will adopt this legislation when the time comes. Plus, the Istanbul Convention ratified by Ukraine. I am so proud, actually, that we did manage to have it ratified, because, you know, it was waiting for it. We were waiting for it to be ratified for 10 years, and had been, and then it finally happened. So now we need to make sure that we fulfill our commitments. And it's even more critical now. Why? Because a lot of Ukrainian women fled abroad from this war. And so we need to know what mechanisms are at our disposal to protect our women wherever they are. And here, the Istanbul Convention can be very helpful to help us protect our women, say, from social exploitation and to criminalize this, and help us better cooperate with other countries. So our parliament has been working on the respective legislation so as to implement this international instrument. And I believe that in the near future, we will see it passed by the parliament. And so I started off my opening remarks with awareness, and I'm going to wrap up by mentioning awareness once again, because a lot depends on those campaigns. A lot depends on whether they are properly coordinated by the government, whether they are universal. I mean, not being initiated by a certain NGO or by a government or by a media project. I mean, instead, it should be this comprehensive project that is implemented by all of those stakeholders together through the various platforms and channels. So this is the way to go. I believe having those full-scale joint campaigns for the people ultimately to better understand the message, because if we're talking about some isolated initiatives, I'm afraid in the long run the effect is not always what we expect it to be. Finally, 1547 is just one of the examples, and Uliana just mentioned this before me already, like the hotline. I mean, when Uliana actually called the hotline to make sure that it's working. It's not always the case. I mean, but even if the hotline is effective, people might just not know that it's out there. So, for example, I know that we had 60 calls reported to that hotline, while in fact, we know that the problem is much bigger than that. So we need to make sure that this information is promoted effectively, that people know about this hotline. This way they can actually use it to report domestic violence and other crime, because we know 102, 103, all those emergency contact phone numbers, people know about them. So we need to make sure that our hotlines are as well known to them. So we have a lot to do as a state, of course, to make sure that we are effective. And when we do that, we need to be able to measure whether we managed to achieve our goals. At this, I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you so much. Thank you, Marina. You are absolutely right. It is through the joint effort that we can effectively address this greater evil. And of course, we are very grateful to the international community for their support. And here today with us, joining this conversation, we have the International Organization for Migration in Ukraine. And in 25 years of their operation here in our country, over 800,000 of migrants in Ukraine were actually able to receive the assistance that they needed. And I mean, not just Ukrainians, other nationalities as well, those who became potential migrants victimized by human trafficking and other groups, socially, other vulnerable social groups. So today we are joined by the acting deputy of the Ukrainian office, Stephen Rogers. The floor is yours.
Так, доброго ранку всім.
Good
Я
morning, everyone.
дуже велику подяку
I
організаторам та
would like to thank
учасникам та
the organizers and the participants of this event.
So as was noted, I wanted to note and say that IOM has been working since 1998 here in Ukraine, specifically if we look at the topic of today's discussion on trafficking in human beings across the 4 different areas in which we do so. So protection, prevention, prosecution, and partnership. But given the situation we're in right now, and since the beginning of the war in 2014, we've shifted our response and what we're doing a bit to target those possibly at risk of trafficking of persons amongst the population of those who have been internally displaced. Since February 2022 and the full-scale invasion by the Russian Federation, the population's vulnerabilities have increased exponentially due to the intensity and geographical coverage of the war, which is directly and indirectly affecting the whole of the country, leading to what we see in terms of the mass internal displacement and the cross-border flows. So IOM has already done now 7 rounds of what it calls its general population survey, and these figures were sort of hinted at earlier. But as of July 23rd, per our estimates, 6.6 million persons are internally displaced within the country. That's an increase from a month ago in June, which was 6.25 million. And that's largely been fueled by new displacements in the east, south, and north of Ukraine. IDPs from the east of the country now account for 67% of IDPs nationwide. At the same time, 13% of current IDPs plan to integrate locally in their current location, while 68% hope to return back to their places of habitual residence. As of the 23rd of July, again, we note that 9% of IDPs have had no income since the start of the war, and 35% in their household have had under 5,000 hryvnia per month, which is 1,500 hryvnia less than the minimum wage, and that's as of the figures of January 2022. And since then, we've obviously seen very serious inflation. 60% of IDPs have lost their jobs due to the war, and that's amongst those who were employed before 24th of February. So all of these things that I've mentioned, the displacement, the loss of homes, loss of income, barriers to access assistance and services increase the risk of all forms of exploitation. And therefore, IOM, in partnership with national and local governmental agencies and civil society, has been working to strengthen the counter-trafficking response. So I mentioned the 4 different areas in which we work, and in some of those we're working even more so since February 2022. In particular, I think we look at prevention and protection. So prevention, other hotlines and means of reaching out have been mentioned. For IOM, we run the National Toll-Free Counter-Trafficking and Migrant Advice Hotline 527. And since the start of the full-scale invasion, we've provided over 80,000 consultations in response to nearly 21,000 calls. That's the same amount we provided over the whole of 2021. So now we also provide consultations on Telegram through the chat bot, the Safe Migration bot, which we're also seeing as popular and gaining popularity amongst Ukrainians abroad. Similarly, for prevention, we've developed other materials with our NGO partners, and together with the European Union delegation to Ukraine, conducted a large-scale nationwide awareness-raising campaign on trafficking risks and safe travel rules, which has reached over 10 million Ukrainians. So we are being asked now a lot about what's the impact of the war on the situation with human trafficking. What are the current trends? So our experience with counter-trafficking in humanitarian settings around the globe shows that it's quite early to provide specific estimates or specific figures. As we see happening now, as happened in 2014, that a lot of stakeholders, the focus has shifted, and we need to immediately support, whether it be IDPs, other vulnerable people supporting the armed forces, therefore taking away perhaps some capacity and time from the identification of victims of trafficking. Also, we know that the process, of course, of human trafficking is time-intensive: recruitment, exploitation, release, and eventually, when the person comes around and understands what has happened with them, and then they come and report. In the first 6 months of 2022, IOM has identified and provided assistance to 118 victims of trafficking, of whom 35 were identified after the 24th of February. In all of these cases, the exploitation occurred prior to the war, but we anticipate that there will be changes in the profile of beneficiaries closer to the end of the year, the end of 2022. So of these 118 persons, 67% were men, and 97% of the cases were trafficking for labor exploitation. 50% of the cases were internal trafficking within Ukraine. It's of course quite difficult to provide comprehensive specialized support to trafficking survivors and victims and the people who are at high risk of being trafficked. So that's why we are working through our network of partners in the field to tailor that support to their individual needs. So that can cover medical, psychosocial, legal support, the restoration of documents, linking with family, housing, education, perhaps support in growing one's livelihood, like income generating equipment. Also, I should note that since the 10th of May, IAM has reopened its medical rehabilitation center for trafficking survivors in Kyiv. And that also will cover people who have suffered exploitation and victims of gender-based violence. So as of now, 39 people have received comprehensive medical assistance. So one of the things that's been touched on already by other speakers as well is the importance of reaching out and encouraging those people who have experienced exploitation or abuse to apply for help to the various government partners, in particular to the social services, to the police, as well as to NGOs and international organizations. So one thing that we are doing in this month actually is we are also launching an information campaign looking at what are the signs of human trafficking and also putting a spotlight on the support available to survivors. Basically, the messaging being, if you feel abused or exploited, do not be afraid to ask for support. There are a lot of people, there are a lot of agencies, both government and non-government, who are here to help. And with that, I'd like to conclude my intervention and thank you for the kind invitation and your consideration.
Thank you, Stephen, for the work that you're doing for our citizens. Ukrainian society is grateful to the world community. And at the same time, we do a lot ourselves. We have a lot of people who can do a lot, raise awareness and lead the society. Find Your Kin is a project that was initiated by Katrina, a TV presenter. Thousands of Ukrainians were able to find their relatives, rejoin their families. And to hear the analysis of such success stories is very useful to those who are only at the very beginning of this way. Katrina is with us today, but before we talk to her, we will share a short video with you. Social project of Katrina Sacha, Find Your Kin, find your family. Do not lose hope, you will find your relatives. From the beginning of the war, we have a special Telegram channel where people can find their relatives. TV shows join in. 18,000 of Ukrainians are looking for their family, and they can find them through our project. More than 1,500 families reunited with our help. If you need to find your family, leave a message in our chat box. Any of you can join in the search. We're strong together. We will do everything to make sure you find your family. Thank you. And Katarina, please, you're welcome to share your experience and tell us what exactly we need to do to support the victims and how we can avoid problems. Good morning. Thank you for the discussion.
And for your touchy words and for your important words. Так, проект «Знайти своїх».
Yes, This project Find Your Kin, and me as the person who initiated this project, who represents this project, we perfectly know how important it is to look for people and how difficult it is at the time of war. I will tell you first about what we did in the very first days of the war, because right from the very beginning of the invasion, we understood that people get lost, they get connection, both adults and children. There is chaos, there is too much information, and we need one source, one medium that will provide information about people who are lost and algorithms that can be used to look for people. We will talk about that because this algorithm is very important when you look for people abroad, if we talk about human trafficking, because it is mostly abroad that people can get in really difficult situations. In Europe and European Union countries, we are assisted a lot, of course, but you still find bad people who can use the situation to their benefit when Ukrainians are so vulnerable. So the project, Find Your People, Find Your Kin. Marina, who was talking right before me, said that consolidation of sources was necessary and media coverage was necessary. And I'm the person who is responsible for media coverage. And I can say you're absolutely right. It is important to consolidate all of our efforts. And it's important to work together with the police. We cooperate with the police for 2.5 months, this latest month. And I need to say that looking for people with the Ministry of the Interior, because this is how we do the program. Media and then the Ministry of the Interior. It is very important to work with police to engage them in searching for people, both in Ukraine and abroad, because police has access to large numbers of information. And this is where all of the information needs to come to. Marina also mentioned about this variety of hotlines that appear. I need to say, from my experience, is that 102, this is the hot number of the police of Ukraine. This is the number that is easily remembered. And if people call that number, the information will get where it needs to get, please remember. The program to look for people in the EU. This was a topic that worried me a lot because we had situations when we had no idea what a person could go to, or we had no idea what kind of route could be for a person who went to Russia and then left Russia. We had instances like that when people just got lost. So if you have no connection to somebody, and what can you do if you think that that person could be abroad? The first step is to think the person could be subject to human trafficking, which means that that person could be abroad and not necessarily safe. Psychologists and the police advise you to calm down and remember the smallest details and dial 102. This is the police number, hotline in the police. Immediately. Time is important. There is no wasting time. Call 102 immediately. If you have a case when you may think people could be abroad, dial 102. Okay, physical application to the police. I need to tell you that if you come to police or your phone, it's the same. If you just call, it will be equally important and things will start changing. Ukrainian police work with the Interpol, with their counterparts abroad. So if you are in the EU and you lost contact with a person who is close to you or a person you know, please dial 112. This is the hotline for police outside Ukraine. If you do not talk the language of the country you are currently in, please turn to Ukrainian consulates or other diplomatic missions because they're all working with us. We just heard about it, that diplomatic missions, they all register all of the applications and all of the instances, including instances of human trafficking, they process and send the information to where it needs to be sent. Next slide. The next step. You need to describe the person that you're looking for and send the application. First of all, you provide registration data and then physical appearance, the smallest things, anything you can remember, where and when the person could have disappeared. So the phone number and the license plate number on the car that that person could have been driving, or maybe of the car where the person was seen last. The smallest details you can provide will help our police or European police. Anything you know about social media, email, all of that information is important and we have it in the application form. So the same as in Europe, any small things, any suppositions, any of your ideas where the person could be, who the person could be staying with, who could be the criminal, who could be the person enslaved.
Будь-які дрібниці, вони можливі.
Any small things matter. It is also worth it if you have a picture, because that will make the search so easier. The next slide, please. So things that you should not do. It's important that we talk about that. You should not try to do the search by yourselves, and you should not turn to private investigators. A lot of them are not good people. This is something that we see very often because people will charge a lot of money or they will charge some ransom. Please don't do it. Please, it's important. Don't transfer any funds. Don't use private individuals in Ukraine or abroad. In most cases, these are fraudsters, and that will only make the situation worse. If you work with volunteers, they should be connected to the national police, like we do. We need to cooperate with the police, and anything that gets to us is transferred to police. So please do this profile check, learn about people who you're talking to. And please don't wait for your relatives to come back online. Inform that they have disappeared immediately. Time is very valuable here. This important topic was raised with the help of the Ministry of the Interior of Ukraine, National Police, with search that is done, which is supported by the Canadian government. And altogether, we created this search algorithm based on what exists in European countries. And we're very grateful for the cooperation. Because in the first days of the war, when we just started searching for people, Well, I wouldn't really say that we dreamt of it, but we really wanted to engage international partners, internal partners like police, and then external partners like international organizations. We understood it was very important, and we are grateful to such projects. Being media people, we understand how important that is, and we are grateful to those who tell us what and how we need to do, and we'll continue working on that. Do I have several more minutes to talk about media? Okay, I understand. I need to be short. Just some minutes. Media and human trafficking. Media sources need to be very careful with this topic. I remembered an instance that happened before the war, and you can only imagine what's happening now based on what happened before. My colleagues from the Ministry of the Interior will understand what I mean, but it was still before the war, some 6 months before it. There was a story on the news, a man who was found abroad 15 years later after he disappeared. He was enslaved. His passport was taken away. And that was in Europe. Finally, he was able to get back online, but it took 15 years. In the very beginning of our meeting, Katrina said that it's difficult to talk about cases now because they're all ongoing. But just imagine that 15 years from the moment then the war started, we could still be finding people who were enslaved or imprisoned or become sexual slaves. I mean, this is horrible. So we need to do whatever we can to make sure that it does not happen, that we do not have such a scenario when it could take 15 years for people to come back. And here it's important that we engage mass media, volunteers, civil society, local authorities, everyone, because such horrible instances should not happen again. And we are very grateful to the support program for such an initiative, which we believe is very important. Thank you, Catherine, for the work you're doing. And from those 1,500 families who received support, we're grateful to you. But we need to remember that thousands are waiting for your work. So please keep going. We wish you good health, and we hope that you can provide support to us and we can then help our citizens in difficult situations. So here we finalize our first panel about internally displaced people. Before we start talking about external migration and countering human trafficking abroad, we will show you a short video, Stop Human Trafficking. It was prepared by students in Lviv. And after that, we will invite Svetlana Harashchenko, who is the moderator of the second platform. So please.
We're wearing masks to protect ourselves from the virus, while they are disguising their motives, looking for new victims. And by them, I mean those who are hiding behind their masks. I will help you find the job of your dream job. You will make a lot of money. You will forget about your troubles. But in reality, I'm a trafficker, and I will sell you into slavery. I will help you become a top model on the catwalk and sign with the leading agencies of the world. But in reality, I'm a recruiter and you're nothing but a human product that I can sell. You can forget about your career. Sexual slavery is what's ahead for you, and tortures. When you are in trouble, not knowing how to pay off your debt, come to me and I will help you. But in reality, I'm just another element in that chain of black transplantologists, and I will sign you up and will make you another victim of our criminal conveyor. Do not buy those fairy tales. Remember that criminals are hiding behind those masks. They are extremely deceitful, and a nice offer could in reality be a trap, regardless of your gender, social status, your age. All of us, we need to be careful. Do not give your ID to a stranger. Protect yourselves and your families. Stop human trafficking. Greetings, everyone. I am happy to welcome you at this event. This is an essential discussion. It is absolutely critical for us. We are discussing internal and external migration and the risks associated with human trafficking for our citizens. So in our first panel, we spoke about human trafficking as a phenomenon
Завдання нашої
and about
другої
the associated risks. Here at the second panel, we will focus more on the tools that we can use to protect ourselves and our citizens abroad and in Ukraine from falling into the human trafficking trap. So what can we do as governmental institutions and agencies, as the media community, as the cultural community? And here with us, we have guests, our speakers who work in this field, who have a wealth of experience in terms of how to help those who fall victim or might fall victim to human trafficking. So let me begin by passing the mic to Valentin Skuratovsky, who is leading the delegation in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So, Valentin, what are the threats that our citizens face abroad? How can our diplomatic institutions, how can they help our citizens, how they can help Ukrainians who flee to the EU countries from this war? What tools are out there? What tools are you using specifically in your work? Thank you, Svetlana. Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure and an honor for me to join you for this panel discussion. So greetings to everyone joining us, listening to us. On behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, let me assure you that our vision is this. Because of the aggression, about 6.6 million of Ukrainians, mostly women and children, had to flee Ukraine. So in just one instant, and on our hands, we have this new vulnerable category, vulnerable group of Ukrainians who they had not been preparing for this migration. They have no knowledge of the legislation. They have no financial means to support themselves, which means that they could actually be victimized by drug trafficking, by illegal employment practices, what we just saw in this short video ending the previous panel. So from the very first day of the Russian invasion on February 24, our neighbors took an unprecedented decision and opened their borders to Ukrainians who were fleeing from the missile strikes. And they were willing to receive Ukrainians, even those of them who had no IDs, no documents to identify them. So it was the first time in history of Europe when this temporary protection was granted to Ukrainian citizens fleeing abroad, guaranteeing them access to medical assistance, to education and other benefits. Plus, the receiving state, as we know, provides financial assistance as well to those groups of refugees. So how does this impact what we do at the ministry? Well, like I said, this unprecedented number of Ukrainians had to flee abroad in one instant. And now all of the Ukrainian diplomatic institutions located abroad need to join effort, especially those located in the EU, in order to help those Ukrainians. We need to provide quality consular services to the Ukrainians fleeing the country, and they are one of our priorities, for our consular offices and for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And starting from February 24, we have been working without weekends, no breaks for holidays. We have extended our workday. It now makes 12 hours, and we have 24-hour hotlines available as well, where we provide consultations to the IDPs and refugees. And of course, they are our priority currently. We've strengthened our staff in those respective states, save for Russia and Belarus. We know that in those countries, our staff was reduced, on the contrary. But in the EU states, we did strengthen our staff, making sure that more people are available to help Ukrainians in Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic, Romania, Moldova, Poland. Of course, this staff now includes those formerly employed by our agencies in Russia and Belarus, and of course, other staff as well. In the Republic of Poland, receiving the most of our refugees in Przemysl and Helm, in Lodz and Poznan. We've strengthened our teams, and also we provide on-site services, traveling out to other locations within Poland. And we've invested effort to improve our migration processes to make sure that we can dynamically support our consular services in Europe. So working closely with the volunteers, the competent agencies of the respective countries, we are now working together to develop some simplified procedures for Ukrainians seeking free of charge medical assistance and other kinds of support. Plus, we've set up a specific and designated section of our website, mfa.gov.ua, and we've also incorporated the TripAdvisor element, which is basically a map featuring the essential details of how to cross the border of the specific country, and other useful information, such as, for example, how to avoid human trafficking. and other safety recommendations. We have 24-hour hotline, I mean, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for our citizens abroad. Also, we prioritize the updating of our databases, including voluntary registration of Ukrainians, the so-called Druh or Friend program. You can find it at friend.mfa.gov.ua. Again, this serves to improve our communication with the Ukrainians abroad and prevent all kinds of crisis situations for them. So we try to make sure that our offices abroad have access to accurate and full information to make sure that we are effective. And of course, we communicate with the citizens. We reach out to them through the mobile apps or other means to the number that they specify when they register. Of course, documenting procedures remain an issue. I mean, the IDs, rather, because a lot of Ukrainians fled abroad without any IDs or without their travel passports. I mean, it could be just without their Ukrainian passports, it could be just no, sorry, travel passports. It could be just the Ukrainian passport that they would use to cross the border and the certificate of birth for their children, and that's all. So what we're working on is ensure that they have proper IDs, maybe extend the validity of their travel passports if need be, or issue them a new ID for them and their children, I mean. Also, we monitor the situation with the protection of rights for the Ukrainians fleeing from this war, including most vulnerable groups, such as children, and of course, those who don't have parents, or those with a disability, and such. So, in close cooperation with the competent bodies and agencies, we work together to prevent human trafficking. Awareness is, of course, of relevance. We need to make sure that we work together with our partners to raise awareness among the citizens of Ukraine, explaining to them how to avoid situations associated with human trafficking. You can actually find the respective information at the web page of the European Commission in the Ukrainian language. And of course, we process the reports we receive from the Ukrainian citizens. Currently, we don't have any reports from Ukrainians, but we do have procedures in place, such as when Ukrainians reach out to one of our offices abroad, consular offices abroad, that they could receive proper response. For example, we just had this case recently when two underage children were attempted but when the perpetrators attempted to take them to Spain for their sexual exploitation, but we managed to prevent that and return the children back home, preventing the crime committed by the so-called agents. It could be the case, however, that this begins in Ukraine. I mean, this whole trafficking scheme, human or drug trafficking, it could have the roots in Ukraine. So we need to investigate this part as well. We need to make sure that it is properly investigated and prosecuted, because we've had reports from Greece, Italy, Poland, Hungary, and Slovenia about the same. If we look at illegal drug trafficking, it was Taiwan, Brazil, Malaysia, and Russian Federation that the Ukrainians got the most severe sentences for drug contraband, and one of Ukrainians was actually sentenced to death. Of course, there are many factors that complicate the investigations. In such cases, we need to take them into account as well. But there's good news as well. With the help of our diplomats, we managed to free 2 Ukrainians arrested in Thailand and sentenced to 25 years of imprisonment for drug-related offenses. In terms of the Russian Federation, granted that the Ukrainians forcibly deported to Russia are facing this great threat. We've had Ukrainians going to work to Russia as couriers or forwarding agents, but in reality, it turned out that it was all about the drugs. According to Vienna Convention, the respective action needs to be taken by the accredited body or agency. So given the constraints of the current situation, we need to engage other competent bodies and authorities to help us assist the Ukrainians who are currently being detained in the aggressor country. Also, the UN Commissioner for Refugees allocated additional resources to this end, and effort has been invested to improve the investigation procedures and data retrieval, because we need to be able to identify the victims' current potential of human trafficking and help them effectively. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I will violate the program a bit because we have a comment that can be addressed at you. It's a comment from a person who is currently in Romania and Transylvania. And they said that they are cooperating with local authorities to prevent human trafficking. At the beginning of September, they want to have a special event with the refugees, but they also need that still much needs to be done. The question for you is how we can organize this cooperation with activists, with the civil society, for example, in Romania, to inform Ukrainians better about the risks associated with human trafficking. Well, thank you for the question. It is always good to hear from people who care and who do a lot as volunteers and who support our citizens in such difficult situation. Now, as refugees or people who have temporary protection in the European Union, what I would say to people who are watching us now and who have some ideas including cooperation with us, with diplomatic missions, you can turn to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You can find this information in contacts. If we speak about Romania, you can get in touch with our colleagues in the Ukrainian embassy there. Information about contacts is also available on the website. I can also say that I will promise that this information about you and about the questions that you have, I will transfer that information to my colleagues in Bucharest, and then we'll look into the issue. One more question that we have here, probably Valentin, is for you as well. It's from YouTube. How can we have the procedure of providing Ukrainian citizens with foreign passports? Will that help them to avoid risks of human trafficking? Or, for example, in case their passport is taken away from them, they know that they can turn to our embassy and get a new passport? That's an interesting question, and I will pass it to my colleagues who are providing consulate support to the citizens. Right now, and I think I've mentioned it already, we know that work with documents that is done by the consulates, our diplomatic missions abroad, includes certain actions with passports. They can provide you with the certificates proving your citizenship. They can prolong or extend the period of the passport, or information about children can be introduced into the passports of their parents. I have no information right now about issuing passports, unfortunately, but I think this is something that is important, and I will transfer your question and your proposal to my colleagues. Thank you, Valentin. We are moving on. We have already heard today from the previous panel as well. Katrina talked about the national police as being one of the key institutions that are the first to get applications in case of human trafficking. Our next speaker will talk about how national police works with that. What kind of challenges the police is facing now, what they are seeing at the time of war in terms of human trafficking. One more question that could be interesting for us, for the audience, is whether we can see increased risks of human trafficking with a large number of internal displaced people and refugees, and what solutions we find there. So the question will go to Maxim Fedorchuk, who is the Lieutenant Colonel of National Police of Ukraine. So Maxim, you're most welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me and for organizing this event, which is very important. We already heard from people who talked before me. Many Ukrainian citizens had to leave their homes when the invasion started, and they became internally displaced people or refugees. More than 9 million people had to flee the war, as the UN agency tells us. So one of the first priorities for national police, for government institutions, civil society, OSCE, was to have prevention measures. First of all, we talk here about border crossing points, railway stations, where we had information campaigns. where we talked to people who wanted to evacuate to Europe about possible risks, where we gave out leaflets aimed at preventing human trafficking and at informing people on what they could do if they get to such situations. Lviv University of the Ministry of the Interior introduced a Telegram bot, Stay Safe, where Ukrainian citizens can learn about legislation or hotlines in Ukraine and abroad, which they can call if they need assistance from a specific state. We are now working with this Telegram bot. We collected information from European countries, all of the materials that they have to counter human trafficking or materials that they have on job opportunities. And since this is about the countries that our citizens went to, these materials will be made part of our chatbot. Together with our mobile operators, cyber police, we were able to provide or to send messages to more than 4 million people who left Ukraine. In these messages, they received all of the information about hotlines or about instructions what to do concerning specifically the country where people were going to. For example, people who went to Belgium or to Poland received information about their respective countries. We are enjoying close cooperation with Interpol, with Europol, with the European Organization for Protecting Borders and Borderlines, Frontex. We cooperate with them all the time in case we get any information about potential instances of human trafficking against Ukrainian citizens. We get this information from protected channels of Europol. From the beginning of the war, we had a special protected mobile messenger that covers law enforcement of European countries and Ukrainian police. Information goes through a 24/7 and is processed immediately. Austria is heading a mobile group to counter human trafficking in respect of Ukrainian citizens who were temporarily displaced to Europe. This group includes all of the countries that border on Ukraine: Hungary, the Czech Republic, Moldova, Romania, Poland. The latest meeting that we had also included Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia and Finland as well, because we need a special mechanism that will help us identify people who were deported to the Russian Federation or to Belarus or occupied territories and then moved to other countries. This group has meetings every month, and we report about what has been done on fighting human trafficking or preventing human trafficking. And the focus here is on Ukrainian citizens who were evacuated. We hear about the results of what was identified, about the instances of human trafficking that could involve Ukrainian citizens. Through Europol, we get information about 49 potential instances of human trafficking related to Ukrainian citizens. But only in 3 cases we see criminal proceedings in Europe. Now these criminal proceedings have no Ukrainians identified as the victims. Of course, that should make us happy, but we understand that more is to come because the war is going on and there will be more crimes related to human trafficking. Inside Ukraine, we cooperate closely with the National Social Services, with the Ministry of Social Policy and Ministry of the Exterior. First of all, we talk about children. About 100,000 children were educated in various boarding schools or orphanages. This included orphan children or children deprived of parental care. These children were moved into family, and now we, together with all of the other institutions that are relevant in this case, are checking the conditions in which the children found themselves when they were brought back into families. 2,000 children were evacuated, including abroad. Together with the Ministry of the Exterior, we work closely on monitoring the situation with these children, and we try to make sure that they're registered with the consulates. Because out of those 2,000 children that were evacuated, a lot of them are orphans or have no parental care. We as national police send requests through Europol and Interpol, and all of the institutions that were bringing up children and were evacuated abroad were checked. The people who are taking care of children right now were talked to, and we have no information about violation of the rights of children. Starting from the beginning of this year, national police took part in 2 European operations or events aimed at countering human trafficking. This was part of European multifunctional platform against criminal deeds, which is called Impact. 2 of such operational plans were joined by our national police. We were able to identify 14 instances of human trafficking at the territory of Ukraine as a result. And we implemented the national prevention scheme, during which we checked institutions for children at the territory of Ukraine. So we checked about 300 of such institutions, and also a lot of locations where internally displaced people are now living. We do a lot to work with the citizens who were forcefully deported. We receive varying data from varying sources, from UN agencies on refugees. They tell us that about 2 million Ukrainian citizens are now present in the Russian Federation, 10,000 in Belarus. At the same time, State Department, the US State Department, talks about 900,000 to 1,100,000 Ukrainian citizens who were deported to Russia. Out of them, 200,000 are children. We summarize all the information we get about the citizens who were deported to the Russian Federation. We have a special department within the Ministry of Reintegration of the temporarily occupied territories. They have about 15,000 cases of information about those deported. 5.5 thousand out of them are children. National Police and Department of Immigration checks the information and tries to identify the people, information on whom comes to our information bureau, and we share this information. Then we also engage countries of the Baltic within this group, because these are the countries to which our citizens could be coming from the Russian Federation, and we study the situation there. The Department of Migration and Police had several exchange trips to the countries where right now the largest number of Ukrainian citizens find themselves. So we went to Poland and to Spain, for example. In Poland, we were accompanied by representatives from Ukrainian consulates. We went to institutions in Lodz, where we found about 1,000 Ukrainian children. So we saw that pseudo-volunteers, as we call them, try to get access to children. We call them pseudo-volunteers because we do not really understand who's behind them. Cooperating with our Polish and Lithuanian colleagues, we were able to identify the case in the very beginning of the war, where children had to be evacuated to Lithuania, but it was done by such pseudo-volunteers with the aim of moving them to a third country and then probably illegally adopting them, bypassing legal procedures. We have initiated a criminal proceeding both in Ukraine and in Lithuania, and with the help of Eurojust, we exchange information. We also made trips to Spain and to Moldova. In September this year, the National Police of Ukraine will take part of another operation in Europe against human trafficking and labor exploitation in agriculture. Speaking of statistics, I want to say that as of now, we do not see the influence of war on the facts that we see for this 6 months. We were able to set 77 criminal proceedings according to the Criminal Code of Ukraine. 30 people were informed about the suspicion that they were engaged in crimes. We were able to identify 34 criminal groups in human trafficking. So this was the information I wanted to share. If I have questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Of course, we see this information about criminal proceedings and people who are accused of human trafficking. We understand that national police is doing a lot to prevent human trafficking and protect our citizens. I believe this is evidence that you need to turn to police if you feel that you are in a bad situation, if you believe that you have been subject to human trafficking. So please turn to national police or to the police of the countries where you are. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion on Ukraine, we received a lot of support from the special representative of OSCE. We have recommendations about how we can enforce prevention of human trafficking, provided the risks we're now facing. OSCE has issued a special document about tools on what we can do to decrease the demand in human trafficking, because this is what makes human trafficking possible. So it's the honor for us to invite Mr. Ricci, who is the special representative and coordinator of OSCE in Ukraine, and we hope that we'll get answers to questions on how Ukraine can protect its citizens from risks associated with human trafficking, the risks that we have been talking about today, or maybe others that exist as well, the methods and instruments that OSCE has for Ukraine. Maybe there are approaches that we haven't been using yet, but they could be of help for government institutions and other organizations. So please, Mr. William Tricci, Special Representative and Coordinator of OSCE on Human Trafficking, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and let me begin by expressing my gratitude to the organizers of this event, the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, and also for Serge for inviting me to speak with you today. A prolific sex buyer I once prosecuted remarked that war is great for the sex trade. And sadly, this is exactly what is happening and playing out today across Europe. Coinciding with the mass movement of vulnerable women and girls who have fled Ukraine, there has been a surge in online searches across Europe using terms related to sexually exploiting Ukrainian women. Across multiple countries and in multiple languages, terms like Ukrainian escorts have spiked dramatically, in some countries by as much as 600%. Not only are sex buyers displaying an interest in exploiting Ukrainian women, they are acting on it. In Sweden, for example, 30 out of 38 men arrested after the start of the war for attempting to purchase sexual services were specifically trying to access Ukrainian women. This demand, as you said, Madam Moderator, serves as a strong incentive for traffickers to recruit and exploit Ukrainian women at scale, and indeed the market is responding. For example, in Ireland, the largest escort website called Escorts Ireland self-reported a 250% increase in interest for Ukrainian women and offered men the opportunity to live out their, quote, war-inspired fantasies with prostituted Ukrainian women. Quite simply, we see before us a case study in how demand is a primary root cause of trafficking and preys on the most vulnerable. With this in mind, I want to outline a few of the strategic reasons why countries should prioritize efforts to discourage demand as it pertains to trafficking for sexual exploitation. To begin, trafficking in human beings is a financially motivated act, and the demand for sexual services is what motivates trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation. While traffickers are a principal component of the trafficking business model, they respond to a more primary phenomenon, the money paid by men for sexual services that could be provided by trafficking victims. Sexual exploitation is the most profitable form of trafficking globally, generating an estimated $99 billion in profits each year. This means that it's more financially successful than the Apple Corporation. However, while $100 billion a year is paid to traffickers, it's paid by sex buyers who knowingly or unknowingly use trafficking victims. Combating demand, however, is more than just reducing the reward for traffickers. It's also about preventing harm to victims. Sex buyers, the creators of demand, are responsible for harm to victims on several levels. First, by incentivizing trafficking through the purchase of sex, the buyer also incentivizes the harms caused by traffickers to victims. Traffickers inflict harm onto victims because they know they can then sell those victims to men interested in paying for sex. In this manner, demand fosters the cycle of exploitation and the harm it causes. Second, demand causes harm to victims through the sex act itself. Victims do not come to this transaction voluntarily. By definition, they come through force, coercion, deceit, and thus the sex is non-consensual and tantamount to rape. In other words, buying sex from trafficking victims not only incentivizes exploitation, it is exploitation. Third, and often overlooked, is that commercial sex acts with victims are often supplemented with other violence. 95% of trafficking victims experience some form of violence, the majority of which is caused by buyers. Let me repeat that. The majority of the violence suffered by trafficking victims is caused by buyers. both familiar and unfamiliar. Thus, buyers are also responsible for the direct violence inflicted on the victims. Finally, discouraging demand is an international legal obligation. The Palermo Protocol, as well as the Council of Europe Convention and numerous OSCE Ministerial Council decisions, legally and politically commit states to take steps to discourage the demand that fosters exploitation that leads to trafficking. In short, discouraging demand is not an option. It's a requirement, and one that each country must and can meet. Moreover, the demand that must be discouraged is broad. As set out in the Palermo Protocol, the demand we must reduce is not the demand for trafficking, but the demand that incentivizes it, that encourages it. That means we must focus on the impact of demand, not its intent. The situation I outlined earlier demonstrates this. The demand for Ukrainian women is not explicitly the demand for trafficking, nor the demand for women who have been trafficked. It is the demand for paid sexual services, which will then be met with victims of exploitation. In other words, men seek to buy sex, and trafficking victims are what they are given. This is why demand for sexual services broadly, the demand that is not for trafficking, but that incentivizes trafficking, must be addressed. So how can countries combat demand? The answer is to implement a holistic response that incorporates means of prevention, such as buyer and youth education, as well as awareness-raising campaigns and legislative tools that combat demand. Ukraine does not currently criminalize demand in any form at all. So at minimum, this means adopting a statute that criminalizes the purchase of sex from trafficking victims. Such approaches help to create both a deterrent and hold buyers accountable for that harm that they inflict on victims. Ultimately, it is important that each country, including Ukraine, embed efforts to combat demand within its national anti-trafficking strategy and national action plan, which I know is up for renewal in Ukraine. I hope you will consider including activities to discourage demand such as youth education when creating that plan, and my office stands ready to support you in this process. While addressing demand is critical, I also want to mention for you what my office is currently doing to protect Ukrainians who have fled the war and now find themselves in countries of transit or destination. Last week, my office, in partnership with Thomson Reuters, launched the Be Safe campaign. The campaign helps Ukrainians to spot the warning signs of exploitation, identify risks, and get help while they are outside their country. We provide contact information specifically on help from trafficking that is official or vetted NGO contact information. You can see the webpage for the campaign here on the screen right now. The campaign is available in multiple languages and includes the help numbers for multiple countries across Western Europe where Ukrainians are transiting or ending their journey outside of Ukraine. It includes, as I said, official numbers or vetted NGO numbers to provide direct help from trafficking while they are outside their country. I would very much appreciate your support and the support of the Ukrainian government in promoting access to the campaign materials across its communication channels, including on Telegram or other social media services, so that we can make sure that all Ukrainians can stay safe and are not exploited. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Richie, for your insightful presentation, for emphasizing such important points about how we can help Ukrainian women avoid exploitation and avoid these risks. Because I'm afraid that sexual exploitation is not always the focus of discussion when we're talking about trafficking, but it should be. So thank you so much for your effort, for helping us raise awareness among Ukrainians, of course, first of all, among women and girls. and teaching them how to avoid human trafficking and the associated risks. So thank you so much for joining us here today. If we have any questions on our YouTube channel, we will address them. We will take a few moments to check that specifically. In the meantime, let us pass the floor to another speaker who has been very active in the field of preventing human trafficking, and this is Jamala, our famous singer. Unfortunately, Jamala was not able to attend this meeting because she's currently in flight, but Jamala did make a short video for us. Greetings, everyone. I'm afraid I cannot be with you today, but maybe this video could work. I would like to thank you so much for raising awareness about human trafficking. I know that to some it may sound just like something discussed in the media somewhere in the headlines, but truth of the matter is that it is happening right here and right now because millions of Ukrainians took refuge outside of their home country, and there's a huge risk of falling victim to this crime, both in and outside Ukraine. So we need to keep on talking about this. We need to be vocal everywhere we can on the social media during such events. So thank you so much for organizing this discussion. Please always stay in touch with your family and friends. Yours truly, Jamala. Thank you so much, Jamala. And I absolutely agree. I would like to join Jamala in thanking everyone organizing this event and joining us here today as speakers, as listeners, to all our audience joining us on YouTube and other platforms. Thank you so much. This means a lot because we do appreciate the importance of the issue, the significance of the issue, and of this effort. Also, we have made recordings of our event. We will have it available on YouTube for everyone who would like to watch it later, who was not able to join for some reason and would like to have a lesson later on. So thank you so much to our colleagues from Lviv, to the National Police, to everyone who joined us today with their presentation, speaking to us about such important issues, about the threats and how to prepare for them. Thank you so much. We hope it was useful. Thank you and take care.